of an obfuscation of our currency, which can only multiply artificial indebtedness in proportion to remaining capacity to service debt. As this said disparity, of course, inevitably manifests in the present failure, it is this process and its resultant injustices which we must understand if a people who make themselves capable of responsible self-rule are to avert failure by uniting over a fact of singular solution. This vastly plagiarized work, therefore, explained over 40 years ago not only how the present failure would transpire, but exactly how to solve and to avert the present consequences. Some 16 years after the original 1968 conceptualization of these proofs of inevitable failure and singular solution, then, of one and one only mathematically verifiable perfection or solution of the inherent objects of a truly free economy, of true free enterprise, and of monetary justice. In 1984, together with exhaustive documentation of these original theses, all this comprised the first and since most plagiarized online monetary reform presence, some 10 years before the official 1993 or 4 inception of today's Internet. While ever-growing numbers of 11th-hour pretenders, nonetheless, offer trivial, degraded imitations of my work as purported solution, even in its original forms, the theses of mathematically perfected economy disproved every recent pretended contending proposition of solution, for over 40 years ago. From its very inception, mathematically perfected economy was a proof of singular solution. That is, from its inception, the conclusive theses of mathematically perfected economy were a proof that nothing else solves the categoric faults of pretended economy, and that nothing else solves the fundamental causes of the present artificial failure. These programs apprise the people of the various countries of the world how to transform the systems of exploitation which have been imposed upon us into mathematically perfected economy. Programs are best negotiated in order, as previous material develops a vital background for what follows. Links to archives of this and previous programs are available at tnsradio.com under the category Mike Montagne and to the domain perfectedeconomy.org. Respondents can sign national instances of our worldwide mandate for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation at perfectedeconomy.org. This program is broadcast regularly at 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 10 p.m. UTC, each Saturday from TNS Radio, tnsradio.com, Tir Nassar, Land of the Free. Original material copyright and trademarked by Mike Montagne. All rights reserved. Owing to the present, even ever-increasing deluge of purported alternate solutions, which would necessarily have to invalidate my original work to prove true, we have become an ever more divided people. That is, amidst literally millions of recent pretenders of the diligence, which instead proves one and one only monetary solution, we have become our own worst enemy. Purportedly alternate solutions are regularly authored, conspicuously, rarely if ever granting credit to the original discovery and proof of the categoric faults which the purported alternative would have to prove having solved, but in turn inherently even failing to meet the requisites of actual solution. All this not only leads to the terribly destructive idea that any one of many different things accomplish the same singular objects which are intrinsic to one fact of monetary justice. It further buries the original fact of solution beneath a heap of every other thing, none of which is solution at all. Examples of such misbegotten thinking are the recent and readily disproven idea that money cannot comprise debt. As we explain again in today's program, this faulty idea in fact derives from obvious misunderstandings of my work. Without qualification, much less without even a possibility of conclusive qualification, pretentious authors of solution have been advocating purportedly spending money into circulation. This, of course, denies us the advantages of issuing promissory obligations, which provide for both producers and consumers to participate in markets which cannot exist otherwise. A newlywed couple, for instance, can afford a $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan under mathematically perfected economy, which they would have to save for, possibly across their lifetimes, under the proposition of spending money into circulation, which holds without qualification that money cannot be a debt or credit. Under mathematically perfected economy, which too comprises a mathematic proof of how and why unexploited promissory obligations are the only plausible vehicle for monetizing our production, the newlywed couple is permitted to own and to consume of a home for merely $1,000 per year, or $83.33 per month. Is it to our advantage, then, or even to any need whatever, that we prevent them or ourselves from doing so? In fact, as we explain yet again in today's program, these recent contentions arise from misunderstandings of my much plagiarized parable of perfect economy, in which the words of Mike Montagne issue from the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. In this parable, I gave two examples of means of monetization. The first monetizes the production of two agricultural producers. The second funds government, even without taxation. The dialogue of this parable never took place. It is not a fact of history at all. Yet just over the recent few years, literally millions of web pages across the Internet are now claiming wrongly that long before the American Revolution, Benjamin Franklin explained how to perfect economy. Not only is that Benjamin Franklin actually Mike Montagne, the two examples of the parable differ. The former indeed models a perfection of economy. The latter, however, involves an embedded fault which is inflationary. Until Jacques Jacquerin liberally plagiarized this parable as if it were a historic fact from the first page of his purported debt virus, I explain how and why the story was a parable, and at its conclusion, I explain the embedded fault in an addendum. These explanations have since been removed to entrapped plagiarists, who thus prove their stealings not only by reproducing my work, however altered, but even by anticipating wrongly that the story is a historic fact. Thus we have our prolific plagiarists who, not even understanding the embedded fault, have even proliferated the wrongful idea that debt or credit are our problem. It has the same original work proved long ago. Unexploited credit and the obligations which it represents are not the problem at all. It is in fact extremely amateurish to presume so, not only because there isn't a single discernible detrimental consequence of unexploited credit, but because the resultant currency, under mathematically perfected economy, remains the monetary equivalent of barter, with the distinct further advantages yet of universal interchangeability, automatic preservation of the value of every unit of currency, and, as we have noted, the ability to persist in extremely substantial markets, which not only cannot exist otherwise, but which, in which alone, provide for us to prosper to the full extent of our capacities. The very misbegotten and even plagiaristic proposition that money cannot comprise credit, therefore, is fraught with erroneous, simple deductions. Unexploited credit is not our problem. Inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest is the problem to which they respond wrongly, as if debt or credit were the same thing, or inherently led to the same terminal consequences, which of course is not true. Likewise then, these confused pretended theorists find themselves unable to explain the difference because they are inevitably unable to articulate my original thesis of inevitable failure, which demonstrates not that debt, but that interest multiplies artificial debt into terminal failure. A veritable understanding of this thesis, then, itself disproves that there is any detrimental consequence to unexploited promissory obligations whatever. Worse, whenever I hold these 11th hour pretended theorists accountable for their assertions that money must be spent into circulation, the life cycle of which I alone have modeled and invalidated so long ago, when I point out then how this ever unqualified and unaccounted idea is inherently inflationary, the pretenders uniformly claim one or another means of retiring the ostensibly non-debt or non-credit money from circulation. They themselves then, in accounting for the necessary life cycle of every unit, if we are to solve inflation in an actual solution, are uniformly forced to admit a redefinition of their falsified claim to be merely spending money into circulation. For in fact, in accounting for the inflationary effects of spending money into circulation, which my work modeled and invalidated so long ago, they effectively confess then, no matter how they persist in their claim of spending money into circulation, that in fact they are not merely just spending money into circulation at all. Nonetheless, as they have been unable to prove, and even as all this derives from plagiaristic misunderstandings of my 1975 parable, there is no detriment whatever to unexploited credit. The whole idea of non-credit or non-debt money is not only not original then, it is a juvenile proposition which is readily disproven. Obviously, then, if we the people are to ever achieve solution, we must understand these recent, ever unqualified assertions that we can ultimately identify this singular, actual solution which would serve us. As many of you know, People for Mathematically Perfected Economy maintains outstanding challenges to contending theorists to debate or to discuss their assertions. Politicians and my most blatant, prominent plagiarists uniformly run. Preliminary discussions or correspondence sometimes convert former opponents to confirmed advocates of mathematically perfected economy. Usually, after such preliminary discussions, opponents abstain from debate, and therefore, of course, it would likewise be impossible to intelligently or responsibly merely interview them, because to dig up the truth and therefore the inevitable faults of disparate work is as much as to raise the same points of debate from which they have retreated. To his great credit, then, Simon Dixon, founder of a more recent monetary reform presence at simondixon.org, agreed to a recorded discussion of the proposition of solution. This, then, is the substance of today's program. In our preliminary discussion, Simon confessed that he had yet to be convinced of any prevailing monetary theory. In our very polite initial discussion, it became evident, therefore, that we were